Aloha friends and family, this is Parker Paredes with Wizard Hawaii bringing you the second episode of our Black Belt series. Tonight we welcome Mr. David Terao, who brings a plethora of accolades. He brings a killer pedigree in judo, wrestling, and BJJ. To name a few, David is the NCAA All-American and 4-year starter at American University. He's a member of the USA Judo National Team, and he's a BJJ World No-Gi Champion as a brown belt. David is currently a black belt under UFC veteran Ryan Hall at 50/50 Academy. David, how are you doing?
Oh, doing great, man.
Awesome.
Happy to be home. You know, nice weather, good food. Definitely miss it sometimes being on the East Coast. But
absolutely.
Good to be back.
Absolutely, David. So if you haven't heard about the Black Belt series, what we're doing is we're interviewing prominent black belts in the state that have Hawaii ties and getting to really dive into their consciousness about their philosophies regarding grappling, what's worked for them, what hasn't worked, and then maybe anything that you want to give to the next generation, any advice that you could share with the next generation of grapplers that would help them in their journey.
Awesome. Well, you know, happy to be part of this. Huge honor for me. So excited to have a conversation. Yeah.
Awesome, David. So with that said, tell me, you're from Hawaii, David. Where did it all start for you? Judo, wrestling, BJJ, back home in the States. In Hawaii, where did it start for you?
So for me, it started with judo when I was about to turn 7 years old. I think I wasn't quite 7, but 2000. So, 20 plus years, 23 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Man, I feel old now, but I guess I am old for grappling. But it's funny. We're at Hawaii Judo Academy. I came up through the same club as Taylor at Shobukan.
Okay.
Again back in 2000. I think Taylor's maybe 10 years ahead of me or so.
Okay.
I came up through the same club, and it's cool to see what he's built here as well. Eventually I made the transition to jiu-jitsu not too long after, maybe 2 or 3 years after I had started. So I was like 9 or 10, down at K team with back then it was Ron Shiraki, BJJ black belt under Helson, right? And eventually when I hit high school, I made the move to wrestling, right? I was totally green at wrestling at the time, but fortunately I had the judo and the jiu-jitsu experience to kind of help bolster that. So it's kind of how I got my start.
Sure. So correct me if I'm wrong, judo first.
Judo first.
You're a judoka first.
Yep.
You transition into wrestling.
Absolutely, yeah.
Tell me about that, like having a base in judo and having, we think of judoka of having great hips, great throwing abilities. How did that help you in wrestling?
Yeah, what I would say is that judo. Obviously I'm a little biased, but in my experience, it was a great foundation for a lot of the other arts. Just because learning it young, it's kind of nice. Judo, especially when you're doing hard throws, hard randori, can be pretty brutal on your body. Learning it young is kind of nice. You get to kind of absorb some of that a little bit easier. Plus, kids that are kind of submerged in it, I would say, or surrounded by it, they tend to pick it up maybe a little quicker than most adults that are past a certain point, right? What I would say is that it helped me become very proprioceptive, helped me understand movement on the feet, as well as how to position my body in space in ways that you don't often see from your typical black belt in jiu-jitsu or your typical wrestler, right? I think that's starting to change a little bit. People are seeing the value of cross-training,
right.
Or at the very least exploring unorthodox techniques and movements. So that was my experience. I think judo was a great foundation. You talked about the hips a little bit, and the hip movement and understanding a bunch of different principles, which I'll talk about a little more later. I think that set a great foundation for everything else. But
sure, no, definitely. So, would you say that when you were preparing yourself to compete, in your consciousness, you knew that if the fight was standing up, if the guy wanted to stand with you, you were going to throw him? There were things that you were going to do that you had a competitive edge over him through judo.
Absolutely. Well, what I would say is that I would say I never know I'm going to throw someone.
Okay.
Your opponent might have a cool trick here, there, whatever the case may be. I've been taken down by some people that I was like, I didn't think that guy could take me down.
Right.
But what I would say, it does build confidence, where I know that with the skills I've developed and with what I've learned from the people I've been fortunate to work with, that I have a good shot as anyone else when we get to certain spots, right? That plays a big part in the strategy. And overall, just, feeling comfortable competing, and, this other guy's trying to rip your head off, right?
Sure.
Especially, in all three sports, really. So being ready for that and, being able to stay calm under pressure, I think, is a critical part of it, and it can make you a lot more effective. But
Sure,
yeah.
sure. Competition, David. You talk about competition and staying calm, being ready. Tell me about that. How do you prepare yourself mentally for competition?
Well, I would say one thing that helps me out these days is, I have the benefit of a lot of competitive experience, right? So I've fought since I was like 7 years old all the way up till now I'm 30, right? So I'm over the hill already. But what do you call it? The one benefit I have is that I have over 2 decades of competition in various martial arts and combat sports, right? So, it's never a guarantee every time you step out there. Doesn't matter if this guy's not a big name, if he is, it's all, I always try to prepare similarly. And to me, mentally at the very least, I try to remember, hey, be confident in the skills you have and developed, right? And I like to, talk about this as well. Like, don't try not to fall into a narrative, if that makes sense.
Sure.
A lot of people, I'm definitely guilty of this occasionally, but I try to snap myself out of it, where you might be fighting someone that's very well known, or you might be fighting someone who's completely unknown, right? Rather than being like, oh, I've never heard of this guy, right?
Sure.
I'm way better than this guy, or the opposite, right? Like, oh, this guy has a big name, like that can overwhelm some people.
Psych yourself out.
Absolutely. So
Right.
Just remembering that, let's take wrestling for instance, right? I'm like, oh, I know if no matter who this guy is, if I have more points than him at the end of the match, my hand gets raised, right?
He bleeds.
Everyone's a man, or excuse, in our sport, let me take that back. Everyone in our bracket, right? They're a man, they're mortal.
Right.
Right. So, if you have more points than them, you pin them, whatever, right?
Exactly.
You win.
Your hand will be raised.
Yeah, it sounds kind of silly, right? But I've had moments in big matches where, I might not have felt the best, but I always remembered, like, so what if this guy's ranked, whatever, or has this medal? Like, obviously it's going to be a challenge, but if I have more points at the end, or if I pin this guy or throw this guy, that's it, right?
Sure.
So I always try to remember that. And, the inverse is true as well, right? If I'm fighting someone on paper, I'm like, oh, yeah, I should beat this guy. But I'm like, hey, you got to stay focused. Remember that, again, the flip side is true as well. If this guy has more points than me or throws me or whatever, that's
Absolutely.
his win.
Anything can happen.
Absolutely, yeah. Remembering that is critical, I think, just because, one thing that, I have the benefit of learning a lot from Ryan, not just technically, but also from his experience of competing. Is a very unique experience, obviously.
Right.
One thing he says is, especially with the way grappling is set up today, for the most part, right? There's some exceptions. It's all one-ofs, right?
Right.
Same with like MMA, right? You at least on one night you only do one fight, or
right.
One bracket or whatever. So sometimes not always the best guy wins. It's important to remember that. But that was a unique
A lot
thing.
of variables go into a fight.
Yeah, there's a lot of
things
luck,
happen on fight night.
Right.
Yeah.
So things like that, play in as well. But I would say, avoiding that narrative is pretty important in my experience.
Sure. Mm-hmm. David, you mentioned training under Ryan Hall, being at 50/50 Academy. Tell me about that. Tell me about the dynamic between working out with guys in MMA, working out with elite level judoka, and elite level wrestlers as yourself. Tell me about how that mix is. What is the chemistry there?
One of the reasons why 50/50 is very special to me is, after I finished up with my college wrestling career, I wrestled freestyle for a little bit, and I had some success there. When I made the transition towards jiu-jitsu and judo a little bit more, Brian's gym, 50/50, it seemed like the best place to be. I started working there as an instructor, and the group of people there is just so unique. Obviously, we have, Ryan's pedigree is very well known across the jiu-jitsu and now MMA world.
Right.
He's just, I think he's a great mind for jiu-jitsu, and just a cool dude to be around. We're the vast majority of us, we're buddies off the mat.
Right.
We hang out and stuff. So that's really cool. And we've just managed to create a really, I think, unique group of people.
Sure.
That's very different than most BJJ gyms. Like, obviously, I would say the bulk of our students are on that BJJ side.
Okay.
Whether they're competitors or more on the hobbyist side, whatever the case may be. But we have, we have some MMA guys. We have myself, who's a judo wrestler guy. I'm kind of like an oddball, right?
Yeah.
My brother, who is kind of similar.
Right.
And then, we have people that are more on the striking side. And,
sure.
It all comes together into something that I think I don't really see at many other places, right? Sure. And you know, I have a lot of trust in the person at the top. You know, I have a lot of trust in Ryan kind of leading the charge. And the one thing that's very, very powerful to me is, you know, he leads by example, sure. right? Like he's out there competing. You know, he's getting a little older now, but he's still very disciplined, and he's working hard every day. Like you know, sometimes we'll have to be like, take a break, Ryan, or you know, whatever. Yeah. Like, and
so he's a workaholic.
I wouldn't say that, but more of like you know, he never skips a training session.
Got it.
He always makes sure
dedicated.
He gets what he needs. Yeah.
Sure.
And that's what's behind the I would say the skills that he brings out, right? Obviously, he's very well known for his bottom submissions.
Right.
You know, I talked about it with some of the guys earlier here, where people don't know, or most people don't know, like, if he gets on top and you're not at the level, you are screwed. Like, he's very, 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 very good. One of the best in the world, I think.
Yeah.
I'm biased, but you know, one of the best from on the top, right? So his skills don't, you know, I wouldn't say they come from like some crazy talent. They come from like his discipline and, you know, work ethic, I think. So, but yeah, that's been my
that's
experience.
excellent. That's excellent. Let's talk about that. So you said you don't believe that the skills that he portrays comes from any massive or ungodly amount of talent. Is coming from hard work.
Right,
ethic.
right.
It's coming from the grind.
Yeah.
Do you see that in your path? Is that a reflection of what you've done?
Well, I would say, you know, talent is one of those things that's like, it's kind of nebulous. It's hard to, you know, people can be talented in different areas.
Yeah.
You know, if I'm going to say he was talented in something, it was his discipline and work ethic.
Got it.
He has a great mind too, obviously. That helps.
Right.
But, you know, for me personally, I think, you know, I had the benefit of starting young and kind of falling in love with grappling sports early.
Yeah.
And that just allowed me to put a lot of time and just a lot of work into the grappling arts and learning how to master my body in the context of fighting someone else, right? Sure. At least in the grappling side.
Yeah.
I suck at striking, but what do you call it? That to me was a benefit. You know, I remember like one of the first things one of my old senseis told me when I was like a little 7-year-old or whatever. It's like, David, you have 2 left feet. I'm like a little kid, right? I'm like, oh man, that
You're
sucks.
stumbling over 2 left feet.
Yeah. But you know, I'm a beginner, so like I don't know anything. So
everybody starts somewhere.
Everyone goes through that phase, right? Like if you don't, it's like, why do you even need martial arts at that point?
Right.
But like the vast majority of people, really anyone, if you go against someone who is skillful and like at least close-ish to your size, they're gonna beat you, right? Especially when you don't know anything. That's the point of this stuff, right?
Sure.
So I would say, you know, it's hard to say. Like, I don't know if other people would say I was talented at a young age or what the case may be. But I know the biggest thing was I stuck with grappling and training for my entire life, which that to me has paid dividends. Because, you know, if you get to a certain point, this is not necessarily true, but it feels like in certain ways, it gives you that big lead time on other people.
Sure.
They can absolutely catch up, but it's like there's such a big gap, right? You know, it feels like when we're rolling with Ryan or, you know, someone of that caliber, because he's trained so consistently for so long at this thing that he's really good at, I'm like, oh my God, like catching up to this guy seems
We're talking the
very
cardio,
difficult.
the timing, all of these things that when a consistent athlete, you maintain
the collection
that.
of you know what he's learned and you know what he's developed. So I think that alone has been a benefit to me, because I remember I know a lot of both friends, rivals, competitors that, you know, and you know, that life happens, so it's like, hey, they're things definitely more important than just grappling. So, you know, you got to take care of that, family, whatever the case may be. Right. But I've been fortunate enough where I have had the opportunity to continue for 23 plus years. So, and you know, I'm going to go for as long as I can until, you know, my body breaks down or whatever the case may be. But
that's it. That's the dream, right?
Yeah,
we're doing this. I feel like when we join a club or when we get into mixed martial arts or martial arts, judo, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, we're wanting to join a family, right? And you're wanting to be part of a vision or be part of this mission that is bigger than yourself. So it feels like it sounds like you guys have that at 50-50. We definitely have that here at Hawaii Judo Academy. How would you say for young kids or people who are looking to get into martial arts or jiu-jitsu, judo, how would you say to just start or get into it? Like, what was the first step that people could take?
Yeah, well, I would say, the nice thing about the martial arts here in Hawaii, there's so many places that you can go, and obviously it's like, do your research, try to go, come here, right? But try to find great people that you can learn from. Obviously here, I think you guys have a great environment. Obviously you have Taylor, who's like one of the best judoka from the island.
Right.
But wherever it is, right, start slowly and just be ready to learn as much as you can, right? And if you get to that point where competition becomes a goal, then you can ramp it up and continue to develop and start to get those results. But in the beginning, I don't necessarily think you have to come in like, oh man, I got to be the best at this. Start slowly. It's really that work over time, I think, that develops like the true masters of the sport.
Sure.
And obviously you're going to have people that come right out the gate and do really well. That happens all the time, right? I think the most masterful people, like, maybe they don't win in the beginning, but once you start going towards that later stage of their career, they're still winning. What do you call it? That to me is the mark of like kind of greatness, and not everyone's going to be that, right? So just come in, have fun, come ready to learn. Yeah, that's really the first step, I think. But
awesome, David. Tell me, getting back to your BJJ, your jiu-jitsu philosophies and your style. How would you characterize your jiu-jitsu, like your style?
Obviously it's very heavily influenced by the other grappling arts. But what I would say is that I try to be as how would I describe this? As adherent to, we have this thing we call like first principles, and basically, this is all Ryan's stuff. So I'm not the guy who came up with this, and Ryan has developed this from other sources as well. So I'm sure he would say that, but
he gives you the license to speak to it.
Well,
as a black belt, right?
Yeah,
as part of his lineage.
Beyond, we all have the techniques that we like, and sometimes your body type pushes you towards certain approaches. But I think the biggest thing is finding the common thread through all of these different applications and through all the different arts. So as a guy who has experience at the high level in judo, at the high level in wrestling, and at a high level in jiu-jitsu, I've had the benefit of seeing these things are true here, they're also true here, even in a completely different rule set. So a lot of things like, making sure you have a good base, right? You're able to, create walls and structure. And, obviously there's specific ways to do this, right? And, we talk about that when you teach and whatnot. But rather than being like, oh, we all have to be obsessed with this one move or this one guard, whatever, that's what I try to bring to my jiu-jitsu, is that common thread. So, obviously I love stand-up as a judo wrestler, guys. So when I compete, I usually don't tend to pull. There are some exceptions, right? Especially at my weight class, everyone lives off of the quick pull, right? So that's something that happens, and if I feel like it's appropriate at the time, I will. But if someone wants to stand with me, absolutely, we will go ahead and do that. I'm very confident in my skills, especially in the jiu-jitsu world, on that side. But yeah, I don't like to say I have a favorite thing, but my tendency is to lean towards heavy passing. I try to get on top as much as possible, and very more not class. Well, I mean, you could argue what you want to call it, but pass the mount, all of that kind of classic stuff. Like, that's always what I'm gravitating towards. And the nice thing though is I have the benefit of training with one of the best guard players I think of the modern era. So training with Ryan has also developed my bottom game as well. So it's definitely not one of those things where I have to be on top, I have to do this. It's like I've been able to develop my entire game. There's definitely weak areas for sure, like anyone else. None of us are good at everything. But I feel like I'm very complete for a guy who's been more on the stand-up side. Where I've had the benefit of training when I was a kid too. I developed my guard very young. Obviously, it was like, I was a little kid, so it wasn't that good, but it was good enough at the time.
But it was a guard.
Absolutely.
To have a guard at 7 and 8 years old.
That's
something.
So my style again is like, very influenced by kind of that first principles approach, where I'm really not trying to break any of those principles whenever possible. Otherwise, they're not principles, right? So,
right.
But that's how I would describe it.
Excellent,
Yeah.
excellent. David, it's not common that you have an athlete that has excelled and achieved great things in a multitude of disciplines, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're talking judo, wrestling, NCAA All-American, Jiu-Jitsu World Champion, No-Gi and brown belt. Tell me, you told me earlier that you're making a run for the Olympics in judo. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that entire process. Like, what does that take?
Yeah. So, what do you call it? Judo is a sport that in the U.S. it's not very well appreciated. Which for whatever reason that's the case. But it's amazing to me coming back to judo, seeing how deep the international pool is, and to put it in perspective, like what do you call it? I'm one of the best at my weight class in the U.S. Like currently on the international rankings, I'm number 1.
Okay.
There's plenty of young kids coming up that are very good that could, unseat me next year or the year after. We'll see what happens, right? But currently I'm the number 1 guy at my weight, and seeing the international depth in other countries is very humbling. I fought some guys from Kazakhstan, from Europe, Australia, all these different countries. And the vast majority of them are tough. Like whether I win or lose, I'm in for a battle, right? So the process is very simple. It's to chip your way up the international rankings to get to the number changes based on who's there, because sometimes they're repeat countries, but top 30, 25-ish in the world.
Got it.
If you make that ranking, then you're able to go to the Olympics, or generally that's the case.
Got it.
And right now, what am I sitting at? I think I'm in the 80s right now. And I started, when you start, you're barely even ranked. You're like 200 something. So
Sure.
you have to continually chip
Climb
your way
those-
down.
yeah.
And it's been a gradual process for me. Like I don't want to tell people like, oh, I came out and I was immediately like top whatever, right?
Right.
I slowly worked my way up to where I am now, and I'm going to continue to try to get as high as possible. If I can break into that top 30, that would be amazing, right? And then obviously from there,
Sure.
now we're trying to get a medal or whatever the case may be. But that's kind of step number 1, is to get into that ranking. There are other ways to qualify, but it's a little nebulous. But that's the primary way.
Sure.
It'll actually be a little easier come 2028. Since we're hosting the Olympics in the U.S.
They're going to have more available.
Yeah, so the American team gets to send 1 person at every weight class.
Got it.
Right now, for Paris, even if you're the number 1 guy in your country, if you're not in that top whatever it is,
World rankings,
you don't get to go, right? So
right.
It's really awesome, and it's one of those things where I'm really grateful to be able to travel and do these tournaments, regardless of if I make the team or not.
Right.
It's like seeing the level of depth in the sport that I originally grew up in and loved and still love is it's awesome. So it's very fun. Hopefully, as the years go on, like we can keep raising the level of the U.S. because we definitely underperform for where I think our resources are. But that's the gist of it.
No, absolutely, David. When you say that, I think about the idea that in the U.S. we're constantly indoctrinated to move towards comfort, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Get a good job.
Yep.
Make a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things moving towards comfort, which doesn't necessarily get great results in the grappling world.
Right,
Comfort does, compared to these different countries where people are struggling, where they're grinding every day. They're eating the same food 5 days a week. Tell me about that. I mean, you've been on the world stage. You've competed with guys from across the globe. The lifestyle.
Yeah.
Tell me about that dynamic.
Absolutely. I would say could be a difference in culture, attitude. Or a combination of all these different things. But I definitely notice guys from all of these smaller countries, like, kind of the usual suspects, I would say, Asia, Europeans, like, those guys are always tough in not all the sports, but a lot of them, right?
Right.
So you're like, oh, it makes sense that they're good at judo, plus judo's from Japan, so they're all close to there,
Right.
But some countries that you wouldn't expect, like some of the South American countries, now even some of like the North African countries are really tough.
Right.
And you're like, wow, this guy's from a country I barely even heard of, and
Sure.
he's fighting his ass off and doing very well. So I think there is some of that push to work just a little bit harder. Where again, you mentioned comfort in the U.S. It's so easy to take that step back and be like, okay, we can find and it's not wrong. Everyone has to find what they want to do, and it's not always going to be judo or wrestling or whatever.
Right.
But it is easier here to take that step back and be like, okay, like I've had my fun, I'm gonna do this now, right? And I think a lot of people will feel that pull, especially in judo in the U.S. because I can't blame people because there's not much incentive to be at that high level as far as like funding and like a lot of the stuff I'm doing right now is like self-funded, which I'm totally happy to do. Like one of the things I consider is that you know, I'll always have time to, you know, save money and build up later, where right now I only have 5 years left of prime athleticism, right? So I'm like, let's do it now. If I wait and I want to do it later, it's gonna be much harder, right? Or, you know, might not even be possible. So I think there's definitely a difference in maybe the attitude of some of the other competitors, and you know, I do my best to match that, even though we have other opportunities here. So you know, that's kind of what I've seen for sure.
Excellent, David.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. So it's an honor to have you here. It was great. You're sweaty. You know, you were rolling around with our team. I think you guys put in about 8 to 10 rounds tonight. So it was,
something like that.
Yeah, it was great. So appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
Good luck in your Olympic hopeful and your Olympic journey. So we'll be watching you and supporting you from Hawaii.
Awesome. Thank you, bro.
David, thank you. Awesome.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Friends and family, that concludes episode number 2 for Wizard Hawaii's Black Belt Series. Again, we had Mr. David Terao. It was an honor to have him here tonight to speak about his philosophies in judo, to go over all of his accomplishments in wrestling, judo, and jiu-jitsu. Until next time, we'll see you on the mat. Aloha.